Hello, today we have Chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego, Section 2, The Ego and False Autonomy. It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past, because the past does not matter. And history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge, because knowledge is completely impersonal, and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific, and therefore quite concrete. I was looking at this earlier, and when I read the sentence, perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete, I was shown how perception is concrete, it's specific, it's one seemingly separate thing after another perceived, and I was shown how it flips from threatening to loving, and how we are taught by Spirit, under Spirit's guidance with our thoughts. We make, because we're making all of this up, okay? Perception is, we made it all up. Or from your perspective, I made all of this up. It's what you're allowing into your perception. Love or hate, or love or fear, or threatening, or lovable, or receptive. Okay, so, perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete. So I was shown and told, you get shown under Spirit's guidance how to make love. That's making love. You use your thoughts to make non-threatening, loving, benign, harmonic reflections of what you are, of what God is, of what all beings are without exception. That is what you're going for here. That's what you're learning. So that was very interesting to see. Okay. So yeah, make love, not war. If I made this up and there's a war, but I can be taught under Spirit's guidance how to make love, well, I'm going to pay attention to that. Okay. Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. We can make an ego for everybody in our families, for all those we call friend or foe, for all those on the world stage. We are actively making all of those egos with our thoughts. So just to think about that and not treat something outside of myself as a real thing. It's not real. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So just to remember that with my thoughts, I am making this up. I am making this up. Okay. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both, because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical proximity. This is something I've really been learning. I stop a lot when things come to mind, and things bother me a lot more when they come just into mind, and I do stop for correction a lot more. Things also come into the physical for me that demonstrate to me that I am using thought fearfully. For example, last night I began to experience allergy symptoms, and I just got to look at this, and yeah, let me not forget to go in and ask for help too, and know that all problems are solved by Holy Spirit. But I got to look at this and say, look, this is my attack on myself, and therefore on everything I call other too. This is my attack. Here it is. Here it is. And from there, admitting it's my attack. I've trained myself like an attack dog. Then I can go in and say, show me. Okay. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. I have found this to be very, very, very true. There could be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact. So if you look at your family, you're looking at your family, but then let me change this to but then I discover I am looking at egos that I have made. I am looking at egos that I have made, and they're only ideas and they're not fact. And there's one fact about them. There's one fact, one unalterable fact about all those I call other. And now let's enlarge that circle to what I experience in my community, and now let's enlarge that circle to my perception of the world. There's only one unalterable fact about all those I've been seeing as ego, and it's my job to see this, to look upon it, to remember it, to know it to be truth. Okay. Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego is made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you had never had it. This is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? Oh, I like that. Instead of trying to explain the past, just know that it's the same error being made over and over and over again. I used to get an explanation of why it was made in the past. That was kind of a helper for me. And right now I can only hear the echo of it. I can't hear it anymore. Like, what was that explanation? I can't remember it because it's not necessary. Now I'm focusing on the fact that I just keep making this error over and over and over again, and that's phenomenality. And this is the error I'm here to allow to be undone. I originally came to suffer, right? I originally came for death. Anyone who shows up in time and space came because of a willingness to throw away what is real in their sight. Okay, so that's what I came for, but the purpose changes as we wake up to what's going on. And now, what am I here for? I'm here to let this error be undone. Okay. Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. But do not forget that the mind need not work that way, even though it does work that way now. Think of the love of animals for their offspring and the need they feel to protect them. This is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. I'm going to read that a couple more times. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. So just the beauty of remembering that during my day, there is another way of perceiving. There is another way of perceiving. There's no place like home. Okay. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. In this journey, I have felt like, I think it's the character Gollum who's huddling over the ring, is it in Lord of the Rings, and saying, "My precious," you know? And even when I'm trying to tune into my willingness to heal, but I'm feeling great resistance, I'm going through a period of resisting, this is what I feel like. I'm trying to protect my precious, my precious. And then I learn to relax out of that defensive posture. Then I keep going, and oh, there's another layer. Then I find myself in the same position, but it gets undone, it gets undone. Okay. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation, and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. And as I run into my defenses now, I'm aware of this. I've been using these defenses to hurt myself, to bring pain and suffering to myself, and I really need to let them go. Yet whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that must go together. And even as I say that, all of us are harmless and helpful by nature, and that has never changed. What we truly are has never ever changed, has never been touched or altered by anything that we fantasized. So it's like going back to our roots to become both harmless and helpful, to acknowledge what we really are. Your attitudes even toward this are necessarily conflicted, because all attitudes are ego-based. I like this. All attitudes are ego-based. All attitudes are ego-based. That really stands out for me. This will not last. Be patient a while, and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. So if you don't like the God word, then you could say something that is wholly certain. What is wholly certain? What is something into which no doubt can creep? There's a substitute. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. Yeah, I can feel this, because I'm not capable of true charity. Yet, it seems on this timeline, what's happening for me now is I keep running into my defenses. My defensiveness, my self-protection, my trying to withdraw into the separate self. I keep running into that. And that's okay. I mean, it has to be undone. I have to notice it to allow it to be undone. Okay. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. This is something to notice. The ego always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. The ego always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. To stop in those moments of evaluating egos, to just stop and ask for help and ask for it to be undone. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. I just want to read this whole thing over and over again. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. So when I'm believing thoughts about other egos, positive, especially positive, or especially negative, both of those kinds of thoughts, I'm just trying to make this separate one real. It's my attempt to hold the separation in place. It's a deep, deep habit. I can notice it today, and I can ask to see it differently. That feels like the key right there. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. If you heard my other recording, my talk about, I can't remember what is the help that is truly needed. I think it was called the help that is truly needed. I had an experience with somebody. I looked at somebody else and felt this one was predatory, and then I was led through a healing that made me very happy. It felt very beautiful, and the exact word I used to describe was predatory. So, what's predatory? The ego. If I'm seeing someone else as an ego and labeling that one, trying to keep the separation real, right? Trying to keep it real, then it's interesting, my ego will go in and out of these shadows. It's less predatory, it's more predatory, and we can feel this as the fluctuation of our emotions. And then beyond that fluctuation of ego fake positive and ego negative emotions, there's just joy, there's just love, there's just peace, and we learn to live here in what doesn't change. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence. The ego literally lives by comparisons. Equality is beyond its grasp, and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. It's very helpful when I feel that getting in me. I mean, feeling is very helpful on this journey. And you can feel, you can notice what the thoughts are, then you can, it's okay to admit, I'm out to get. I want someone's attention, I want money, I want food, I want this. It's not, that I isn't you and it's not me. It's a deep, deep habit of thought and a deep, deep habit of belief, and that's all it is. So it's a great moment to notice a getting thought, because that's the moment in which you can remember, oh, I could see this differently. I don't have to see it this way. Appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. So to look at that today, that's just been creeping in for me around the edges with food, this getting. And it's almost like ego saying, and I'm listening too, I'm listening, you don't want to go there. You don't want to mess with food. And I hear you. We need not struggle, right? We can't go in and just decide, I'm going to turn around the whole relationship with food. I'm going to dominate, and therefore it's going to have a physical effect I like. That's ego again. Ego taking charge. Just the noticing, though, the noticing of thought and the ability to go in and ask to see it differently, that's where all the help is. That's where all the help is. Okay. Body appetites are not physical in origin. Yeah, I need to look at this one and sit in it. Body appetites are not physical in origin. Body appetites are not physical in origin. I don't know if you've seen I Heart Huckabees, the film, but there's a scene where they're repeating something. I think it's they're repeating, how am I not myself? How am I not myself? The main character and Dustin Hoffman and Lily Tomlin, they're all contemplating this together. I love that moment. And when I get the call to repeat something, sometimes I'll think of this scene in the movie. Okay. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. So the idea that it's possible to satisfy, for the ego to satisfy itself through a body, the ego regards the body as its home. The ego tries to satisfy itself through the body. The idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind. So the idea that satisfying the ego through the body is possible is a decision of the mind. One more time for me. The idea that satisfying the ego through the body is possible is a decision of the mind. That decision can be undone. This is big. I have felt many, many reverberations around this belief I have that it is possible to satisfy the ego by using the body, through the body. Yeah, it's time for this one to go. Definitely time for this one to go. So I'm really shining the light on it. So what has happened to the mind, it has become completely confused about what is really possible. The mind has become completely confused about what is really possible. So when I notice a egoic thought telling me, hey, it's possible to get satisfaction through the body, I could remind myself, in this moment I'm completely confused. And maybe Spirit could show me, definitely, Spirit could show me what is possible in this moment. Any way I want to use the body for satisfaction. Yeah, it's really time to look at that, to notice that. Okay. The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. I've noticed this. And temporarily, at least, I've kind of withdrawn from interactions just so I can, because I see I don't need to be out to get anything. That's one reason. So the need to interact won't arise in the first place, at least coming from that wrong place. You know, it's not arising because I'm on to it. And so I'm just kind of sitting here in this middle ground where I'm looking at interaction, trying to dominate, trying to unite, subtly attacking in thought. You know, we might be with people, but then an attack thought comes up, a judgment. It's, you're different than I am, you're separate. So I've really been looking at this a lot. And I think there are times when uniting with people, joining with people, can be a defense of ego, and times when I'm guided to it. Then there are times when seeming to withdraw from people and be so-called alone, but I can't ever be alone because I'm always with Spirit. You're Spirit, I'm Spirit, everyone's Spirit, so none of us can ever be alone. Anyhow, though, perceived alone, the call to do that with a body, you know, to be alone. Sometimes that can seem to serve Spirit, and sometimes it's a defense. And for me, I think it's been a big defense. So what can I do? Just ask to be shown, and in those alone times, to really look at what I'm believing, what egoic thoughts I'm still believing, and to let those go. That's what the seeming quiet is for, to look at the chaos of the mind and let go of what doesn't and never has made any sense. Okay. Let's see. All right. It is not free, however, to open the premise to question, because the premise is its foundation. So what is the premise? The premise is the ego believing it is completely on its own. Well, it's wrong about that. So, all right. The ego is the mind's belief that is completely on its own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the Spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. When I see this, I think, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't publish anything ever Maybe I should just be completely quiet at home and let this dwindle and dwindle and die, because aren't I attempting to gain acknowledgement as an ego? Look at me doing A Course in Miracle stuff. I'm doing it so well. Then other moments, though, I will feel the flow of being in my function and the happiness of that and feeling that I'm called to it. So if one day I just stop, it's because of this. It's because I realized, oh no, I was really trying to gain acknowledgement and I don't have to, and now I'm just here. So I don't know. I don't know what I don't know yet. I do know how to stop when I feel disquiet and ask for redirection. Okay, I'm going to go back a little. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. I love that. That's very soothing. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. Think of the quietness of that. Think of the peace of that. And to remember that we are spirit. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be delusional. For example, I am a good enough self in relation to all the other selves. Well, to believe that, I have to believe that the selves are separate. So I have to believe I'm something or not, and something I am not, and there's pain and suffering there. So that is why that doesn't work. The creations of God do not create myths, although creative effort can be turned to mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition. What it makes is then no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptual. So we're experiencing a myth here, an entirely perceptual myth, and so ambiguous in form and characteristically good and evil in nature that the most benevolent of them is not without fearful connotations. Myths and magic are closely associated, since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some account of the creation and associate this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is usually associated with physical birth because it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. This is interesting because it seems that Spirit has called me sometimes to act as a medium, passing messages from Spirit to loved ones spontaneously, not because I plan to, only ever either spontaneously or because somebody has directly asked me, can you hear something? And then I'll check in and see if I hear anything. Why I'm saying this is because when people ask me about the soul or about which lifetime was I before or anything like that, I always get a complete blank. Just a blank. And then the only thing that I will get is that all the lives belong to all of us, and that you can be given a memory of a life because that this has happened to me. If it serves you in your healing, if it highlights thoughts that you believe that you can let go of, and that's the purpose of remembering yourself as another self, But it's not like this guy was one self and another guy was another self. It's not. It's not. And I just can't see it at all. It's like I just read before, can't conceive of it. I just can't. But then I'll say, but you know what? If you go to another practitioner, you'll probably get, if you're looking for that view that I'm not giving you, you'll probably get it. So it's almost like I try to supply them with something else, but every time I go in, I can't see anything. And then when people ask me about the future, and they tell me, well, would it be this or this or that? All the time, every time I go in and ask, I hear yes, 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 to every single future mentioned. And I say, well, I'm sorry, but I see all of these pathways, and I see yes, 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 whatever you want. But the most important thing is, do you want to be happy? Not do you want a specific thing, but do you want to be happy, and do you want to go in and ask that you be given thoughts that lead you into and hold you and carry you in happiness? So that lines up with this. That kind of weird experience of mine lines up with this. Okay. Where am I? I'll go back. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. I like this. It's so clear. Yeah, I'm going to rest here and repeat for a little while. I'm going to rock back and forth in this sentence. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. There's another one. Right-mindedness obliterates wrong-mindedness. What a helpful friend to have, right? Right-mindedness. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. One more time for me. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. This feels like my day. I feel attack. And as I say this, I think there are levels in which I don't see it yet. I just ignore. I'm attacking in certain situations regarding bodily appetites, food, things like that. I haven't seen it there yet. But in other areas, I'm really watching and seeing where the attack is and stopping and going in and asking to see it differently. This is the day. This is the day. Okay, let me find where I am. Oh, I must have hit back. There it is. Okay. The ego cannot survive without judgment and is laid aside accordingly. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic, because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. That's a good one too. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic, because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. Its direction is always automatic, because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. So there's really only one choice. Which thought system am I going to apply to for my thoughts? You get A or B. You get right-mindedness or wrong-mindedness. And so the thoughts come, and we're automatic either way. Either way, if I've chosen right-mindedness or wrong-mindedness, I'm running on automatic. So the ego's whole idea, oh, I'm doing this, and I am therefore guilty or not guilty in relation to someone who's guilty, all of that's obliterated. Both thought systems are automatic. You're running on automatic either way. You just have one choice. You want right-mindedness or wrong-mindedness. And fortunately, when we find ourselves in the pain of being in wrong-mindedness, we can ask to see differently. We can ask for right-mindedness. We're never alone. That's why we can always ask for help, because we can't be alone. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It cannot be emphasized too often. I think we have to remember that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone toward it. Okay, so I'm either blocking knowledge or I'm allowing myself to step toward knowledge. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. And when I hear this, it's like birds singing and my heart opening. I love to hear this. All perception is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world. That is a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. This is where the ego gets challenged. Can you feel your ego thrashing? No change at all. Ego needs change. Change is ego's food. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That's prior. Knowledge is prior to all back and forth. Spirit is prior to all back and forth. There's nothing to compare knowledge to. There's nothing to compare spirit to, because there is nothing else. That is its main difference from everything else the mind can grasp. Okay. Happy healing to you. Happy right-mindedness to you.